Good morning, happy Tuesday. What are you going to choose to do today? I hope you've slept well. I hope you feel rested. I hope you've got some plans for the day in this world where we as adults, many of us are still at home because of the coronavirus, and where many of our children are still at home and not at school or at college because of the coronavirus, because we are still in the middle of a global pandemic, because life is not as it was, and for a while it looks as though it's not going to be as it was, and so we're doing things differently. And I think it is important to keep reminding ourselves of that fact. Something I find quite interesting is that it seems as though there are quite a few people whose coping mechanism is to try and carry on as if things were as they were. And you might experience this if you're working from home and you're still being asked to do things that you think, I don't really see how this is relevant. Because I think what people do is they fill their days, they like routine. You know, we've talked about this, I've said to you that it's important for children to have a routine, but it's also important for adults. And some adults are, I think, holding on to the old routine to get through the day. And it's just important, I think, that we're aware that that's what some people might be doing. And it's okay to ask questions of people if they seem to be carrying on relentlessly, and if they're asking you to do things that seem maybe not that relevant, you know, to ask, well, why are we still doing this? Should we spend our effort and time on this, or could we be doing something else? And it's okay to just go, do you know what, we'll carry on doing this just because it's filling our time and keeping us emotionally grounded. So just a thought on that. So this week I have been talking about, so far this week, it's only Tuesday, talking about children's rights, because it's something that I work a lot with in my job. And I said yesterday I'm part of the Rights Respecting Schools network, but actually, and that's through UNICEF, but actually that's only one small part of children's rights work, because in fact children's rights should underpin everything that we do as parents and as adults and as teachers. And yesterday I set a bit of a task, which was to think about whether you know what your human rights are. So I hope you got on okay with that. It might have been a bit of a surprise. And remembering that our human rights were first sort of written down formally after the Second World War. So at a time when the way that people were living together, the way that people treated each other, the way that a small minority of people were treating other people had led to horrific murders, discrimination. So at the end of the Second World War, they decided we need to kind of write down the way we expect humans to behave towards each other. And that's the fundamentals of human rights, is how we behave towards one another. And I suppose we could think, well, why don't people just know that naturally? Why aren't we instinctively kind? But I suppose where you've got a world that's complex, where you've got lots of nations, lots of people of different faiths, religions, race, then, you know, potentially you need these rules written down somewhere. So these rules for how we behave towards one another, and then later on we decided that we needed more of a kind of explanation of how we behave towards children. And although children's rights are about the way that children behave towards each other and the way that they behave, they're actually a lot more about the way that adults behave. And that's something that I find really interesting when I work with teachers, is saying this is actually about adult behaviours as much as it is about children. It's about us really understanding children. And so within children's rights you have the children. And the other thing, I said yesterday, is that children have human rights, but in addition they have children's rights, which they have up to the age of 18. Every child in the world. And I spoke a bit yesterday about the fact you have the children, and then we as the adults are the duty bearers. It's our job to make sure that children's rights are promoted and protected. And I think it's really interesting that as parents we don't always know that. We don't always know as parents and carers that these rights are there. And I think that therefore the fact we teach about them in schools to children now is important, because hopefully the next generation of parents will get it. And I don't think it's often parents think, oh, it's a big stick to hold up against me. I actually think it's the opposite of that. It's a massive empowerment tool. It makes you really understand why we do what we do, why as parents our job is so important. Our job as parents and carers to protect children. And so some of the rights, I mean, there's 42 we tend to talk about. There's actually over 50. There are optional ones as well, 54, and then some optional protocols as well. And when you actually, if you look at them, you go, oh my goodness, how am I supposed to keep all them in my head? But actually what I find is most of them, they're in your head, you know them, they're instinctive. But sometimes it's useful to just go back and check on them. And so one thing that I wanted to just talk about today, because it's caused a lot of confusion, particularly for teachers, is this idea that children's rights are there, whatever. So Article 2 says, or Article 1 is everyone under the age of 18 has all the rights in the Convention, which is interesting in Scotland, where we say that you stop being a child in law at 16, but children's rights go until 18. Article 2, the Convention applies to every child without discrimination, whatever their ethnicity, gender, religion, language, abilities, or any other status, whatever they think or say, whatever their family background. And whatever they think or say is an interesting one, because actually whatever they do is in there as well, really, because children have these rights. And traditionally in education, until fairly recently, we used to couple rights and responsibilities. And we used to kind of imply that you can only have these rights if you're responsible enough. And that's not right, because for children, they have those rights, whatever they think or say, whether they show they're responsible or not. And in Scotland, interestingly, within our education system, we have these 4 capacities, we call them, but kind of 4 states that we want to kind of have children aiming for, I suppose, so that they're successful learners, responsible citizens, effective contributors, and I've forgotten the 4th one, which is terrible. Successful learners, responsible citizens, effective contributors, and the 4th one, which I can come back to. That's terrible, isn't it? I've got this morning it's gone. But responsible citizens is what we're aiming for. We're not saying that children are always responsible citizens, because they can't be, because of their age and stage. There are times when they won't be able to show responsibility because they are tired or hungry or angry or upset. And our job as adults is to enable them to see that sometimes our emotions, our feelings, our physical state makes us overwhelmed, and that actually regulating those things, being able to know, oh, I'm tired, so I'm not going to say that, or I'm angry, but I'm going to not do that, that's responsibility. And as children grow, we teach them strategies for becoming responsible citizens. And I think that's a really important point, because what that then means is that we're not taking rights away from children because they can't be responsible. Of course we encourage them, of course we teach them responsible behaviour, of course that's our ultimate goal. But there might be times in life when they can't be responsible because of their age or their stage. And of course all children are different, so Although we have this kind of norm of what we call chronological age and age-appropriate behaviours, every child is different. So whilst we might, expect toddler tantrums and then see children grow out of them and become more responsible, there are some children who may be stuck in toddler tantrums until they're older, because perhaps they didn't have an adult when they were a toddler who could just give them that hug and say it's going to be okay, and I understand that you're angry, and I know that you don't like supermarkets, or I can see that you're cross. So maybe they didn't have an adult who was able to hold them and keep them safe, and therefore their toddler tantrums come back later. And that's not their fault. We shouldn't take their rights away from them because of that. But we need to understand that their age and stage development is maybe different. Their development is different compared to the age and stage of most children who we're comparing them with. So it's a really interesting one to think about. It takes a little bit of time to get your head around, because it's almost like people say, but are you telling me that kids can do whatever they want? No, that's not what this is about. Absolutely, we teach children responsibility, because responsible behaviour towards others is about human rights. But while they're children, they're still learning. While they're children, we need to give them role models of adults who behave responsibly. While they're children, we need to let them learn from mistakes and tell them when things haven't gone so well and why that maybe wasn't very kind behaviour. So we'll come back to a bit more on this, but it's really interesting. And if you are interested, there is the UNICEF website, which has some really useful free activities for adults to do to think around these things. So, yes, we want children to be responsible. Yes, we are teaching them about responsible behaviour. But no, we can't take their rights away if they are unable to be responsible. So, might help a bit as a parent. Article 2 is the one there. And yeah, so just some thoughts there, because I found it really helpful to know about these issues and to think about them both in my job and as a mum. So have a good Tuesday. I'm going to go away and look up the 4 capacities. I'm just going to try one more time. Successful learners, effective contributors, responsible citizens, it's gone. That's terrible, isn't it? That's terrible. It's because I've not been in school for a while. It's not that I'm not working, but I've obviously... Okay, have a great day and take good care.